But before that, William gave me a great intro, but here's a little bit more about me. So I've been predominantly working with Safe and Scale and Agile for about the last 5 or 6 years now. I've had some interesting projects along the way. Theo from Dragon's Den, I helped him set up a small community bank many years ago. I actually spent 6 months over in one of the original Safe case study businesses, Nordea in Finland. That was all about screening Russian money that was moving through Finland. So obviously quite important and quite interesting work. And you know, I do a lot of coaching and training, as William said at the start of the call. At the minute, my main client is an Italian aerospace company called Leonardo, and we work on a variety of different products and projects that maybe I can't really talk about so much. But one of the things you probably have seen in the news recently is this idea of what's called Tempest. So this will be the world's first 6th generation fighter jet, designed to make F-35 and all the rest obsolete. So as you can imagine, hopefully I'll be retired by the time that flies. So we are talking about something where I think a lot of those agile tools and techniques, you know, not having a definitive endpoint and iterative development will really, really make sure that, you know, whatever is deployed to the end users is, you know, absolutely best in class and bleeding edge technologies. So as we mentioned, in Safe 5, there are a few differences. So many of us will have known and loved the old Excel spreadsheets. And actually, do you know what? I thought they were fine. Maybe a bit confusing, I think, when it came from kind of scaling up your results from your team level into that kind of art level. Quite nicely now, we've got a couple of tools that let you do this kind of automatically. So if you go and run the exercises with your teams, that will then build out your own kind of fuller art level picture. So the one that's my preference at the moment, but I only say that because it's the only one I've kicked a ball with anger with, is the agility health option. So this will be what we're talking about. Agility health is fairly, I think, established. I've never used their methodology before, and interestingly in this, it's only their technology that Safe are using. It still is the way that Safe assess business agility across those 7 Safe core competencies that we'll talk about in a moment. There's another one called comparative agility. I've not used that, but again, you know, if you have access to an SPC or you're an SPC yourself, you can access all these tools for free through the Safe platform. Interestingly, for those of us who may wish to still stay with the spreadsheets, they're still available, they're still fine, they still do the job. There's a couple of things that they can't do that I think some of the new options do really nicely that we'll talk about in the next couple of slides, okay? But why would this be important for us? You know, the teams are obviously having team level retrospectives, your train's doing your inspect and adapt. So you would like to think on any given day of the week, you know exactly where you are. And I think for the most part, that's true. But I think when we think about these events and ceremonies, you know, realistically, how often do we find it? You know, our retrospective output starts to look very, very similar sprint to sprint. You know, how often do we start to see in our inspect and adapts, you know, maybe root causes that we knew about a couple of PIs before have never truly been addressed, and that's holding us up. So in my opinion, you know, these tools are incredibly powerful for actually getting under the skin of what's happening in your team and in your team of teams, your agile release train, and finding out a lot that maybe you're not specifically asking, you know, when it comes to the retrospectives. You know, we all probably agree a good retrospective tends to be when the teams are zeroed in exactly in terms of what is causing them the issues at the time. They probably don't spend long enough doing 2 things, I think. One is celebrating those successes. You know, almost every agile team that I've worked with has been incredibly good at certain things, you know, either in terms of how they follow and adhere to frameworks, or actually in terms of their more, you know, real product and project delivery. I think oftentimes they don't realize that. So it's really good to feed that back to your teams and give them something. You are doing this well, and I know it feels hard, and I know we slip back from time to time. That can be incredibly important. I think the other thing is it kind of broadens out some of those things that can be easy to skip over. So, you know, one of the takeaways I had from the last exercise I ran here was having a real increased focus on a lot of kind of agile software engineering disciplines. So, whereas the team were fine with Kanban and Scrum and XP, they weren't necessarily where they thought they needed to be in terms of test-driven development and behavior-driven development. So actually, this is a really, really good opportunity for you as a coach or an RTE or just an interested stakeholder in the team to actually hear from the teams what's happening and what's frustrating for them and actually what they think would improve things. Because as we know, there's no magic wand. It's not as if any of us can turn up in a business or a situation and say X, Y, and Z will fix it. So actually taking the time to reflect and listen to the teams, find out where they think the dysfunctions are, incredibly powerful. And we'll talk a little bit, SAFE have a wee bit of a prescriptive way to do it. I think probably we're all experienced enough to look to bring our own flavor and influence into this. But actually, I'm not against the way that SAFE propose that we do this. So here's a real example. If you run it through the Agility Health platform. So what you can see immediately is, rather than when you used to do this in Excel and you'd only get your own results, in the orange kind of part of the diagram, we can actually see a benchmark. Now, the benchmark is all based on whichever industry that you're working in. So I think what we'll see kind of across different industries, very, very different results. So I've got a predominantly financial services background, but now in aerospace and defense. I can imagine we'll have a few pharma, telco, e-commerce, all those good industries around. So this will hopefully give us an opportunity to think about, how we're doing across our peer group. The other interesting thing is the more and more people who are starting to use these tools, the broader these peer group comparisons are actually becoming. So I think when I first started playing with this tool, there was about 60 companies I could compare performance against. We're now up to nearly 100, and that's only a couple of months later. So that's very, very useful to have that. It's probably never going to be completely statistically significant, but I think it will breed us confidence in terms of being able to do that. So, I assume we've all read a spider graph before, but you can see probably clearly here, we have an overperformance against peer group across the team and technical agility, continuous learning culture, and organizational agility core competencies from SAFE. And maybe if you think about the ones where we're either about where we need to be or maybe slightly lagging in this diagram, we can see there needs to be an increased focus on, agile product delivery. Well, you'd probably expect that in a relatively immature agile release train. And again, when it comes to enterprise solution delivery, probably like a lot of us has experienced in our own context, you tend to get pockets of the organization that are very, very good at these things, and maybe other parts that aren't so good, but are maybe curious and would like to know more. So always be thinking, what can you do to, build that confidence and bring those people into the camp? Lean portfolio management, a bit of an interesting one because we haven't really gone that route in terms of this example. So that's maybe something that, like I said earlier, we might want to introduce to the train as it grows, and maybe we wanted to launch another train. It would certainly help give focus there. And lean agile leadership, I think this is always something interesting when we think about it. And certainly in my experience, most teams are perfectly happy with the lean agile leadership they see from their scrum masters and product owners. Most people on an agile release train actually are fairly clear about the lean agile leadership from the release train engineer and product management. I think where it becomes less clear is the real seniors in any organization or business. I don't know if it reflects when we think about the companies we work with at the moment, but in my experience, it tends to be very, very challenging with the seniors because oftentimes they think, supporting an agile transformation is not necessarily doing anything to stop it. I think we'd all hopefully agree there might be a little bit more to it than that. But again, this can be useful, if you do have people at that level, maybe challenging back, I don't want to spend 2 days doing my lead and safe, or, why am I having to clear a half a day out my diary to do a value stream mapping? Well, actually, you can now go to them with some, fairly objective, but yet still to an extent subjective data and start those conversations. I'm not saying it's going to make it, radically easier and all going to come to the party overnight, but I think if you can say, actually, What would you like to do differently to support this? It's just another way to start opening those conversations with people, getting them to think about what they could do differently. And then obviously for those of us that are in either coaching or consulting roles, starting to flight path with those, actually what that would start to look and feel like. So hopefully that gives you a kind of indication of the outputs that you can get with these tools. Are there any questions at all at this point? Okay. Oh, sorry.
How does it work with the traditional Lean Six Sigma framework, Agile?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm interested in William's view here, but I'll give my kind of potted view. So actually, I think if we look not too hard at Scrum, you can probably see it seems to be based up to a point on lean thinking, in my experience. Yeah, I think it doesn't necessarily carry forward a lot of the things that I think are super useful in lean. And I think, again, one of the reasons I like working with SAFe is when I think about it, especially from a software and hardware point of view, I actually think what SAFe does very, very elegantly is kind of use the let's call it Trojan horse of Agile to almost bootstrap an organization into lean thinking. So, if you think about the stuff we just mentioned, the value stream mapping, the increasing focus on delays, let's be honest, as Agile consultants, nobody turns up with a magic wand and makes those coders code any harder. What do? We take away those kind of bottlenecks and holdups, and by doing that, we can compress the lead time, which surely pretty much sounds like Lean 101 to me. How about to everybody else?
Yep. Yeah. You've answered that, Dave. Yeah, it's Lean 101. Wrapped up on SAFe framework. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting when we think about, I'm sure we could do another one of these talks in terms of a lot of the history of SAFe, but, when you read Leffingwell's original book, Agile Software Requirements, that is pretty much a person who is struggling with how you apply lean thinking in the software development context. That's all the book reads to me like. Any other questions at this point?
Dave, what about, it looks like we're nudging management to come to the table when the transformation roadmap says, let's get them to the table early. When I look at the survey that's done here, is it that management didn't come to the table very early at the onset? That's why we're having such a big gap in the results.
I think that's probably a fair assumption. And actually, in my experience, that tends to be fairly common with new trains. I think generally the management will free up the resource in terms of the teams. Generally, they'll probably come and support the first maybe 1 or 2 PI planning, and then I think that initial excitement of everything, all that light and heat disappears more or less, and they kind of revert. And yes, that's perfectly natural human behavior. So, from my point of view, these tools can be a quite useful, polite reminder that, oh, you remember all that stuff we were doing before? And yeah, that's still okay. Well, we might need to do a little bit more there. I think the other interesting thing is, and I think the thing that teams generally struggle to conceptualize is, well, what do we mean by lean agile leadership? Like I said, is it your Scrum Master? Is it your RTE? Is it people further up the organization? Actually, is it everybody in that organization? And I think I know what I think it is. But, how do you coach your teams to realize that, this isn't something that's necessarily going to happen above us in a hierarchy. It's not necessarily anything that's going to happen within the team, but by other people. It's something that everybody has to kind of live and breathe and exhibit. And I think that can be really kind of super scary for people. When we think about a lot of the developers that we work with, some of the most talented people I've ever had the pleasure of working with in my life, but they've been used to and rewarded to for years for kind of sitting in a box and being given a set of requirements and told to work them, maybe never seeing where they went. So all of a sudden say to those people, well then, you get to decide more or less what you do. You get to decide how long it's going to take, and you get to decide what it's going to look like. it can be very, very kind of, you know, so much change for people to take in all at once. But certainly, you know, I think that's something where everybody can reflect in terms of how that they can support these core competencies. Okay. Right. So after you've done the survey, like I say, you'll get probably your best 3 areas to celebrate success. And it's always useful, you know, I think that's the bit that tended to be missing with a lot of these things before. Wouldn't necessarily show what people were doing well, where people were way above peer group. So I think it's always useful to say to your teams and your train, well, hold on, you know, we might have a journey to go on here. We know this bit's sticky for us, but actually we're pretty much excellent in terms of this. So, you know, make sure you're communicating that across. Again, I know celebrating success isn't as simple in the land of COVID we all live in anymore. You know, in the old days, it would have been boys and girls were going to the pub. I'm not sure, you know, if anybody has ways that they think this works well remotely, please tell me, because it's something that's kind of keeping me up awake at the moment. But if you do get the chance, certainly do that. You know, the flip side to that is obviously identify where your team might be lagging. So, you know, generally pick out the 3 worst ones. There's a couple of lenses Safe invite you to apply. So you can either look just against benchmark where you were the worst, or the one I actually prefer to use is when there were the biggest differences between your own scores and what the benchmarks were. Now, you know, your mileage may vary. I don't think there's a right or wrong here. Obviously, your context will kind of lead you to the correct decision in there. Once you've got those, you can start to actually build out an improvement backlog. Now, you're probably wondering at this point, well, Dave, hold on, all release trains have got an improvement backlog anyway, because we know what's coming out, the inspect and adapt, and that's absolutely right. But at least we've got somewhere for them. But also another lens to hold up to your team or your train. What do we really do with that release train improvement backlog? Does everybody have visibility of it? Do we know what was taken forward? Do we always apply what we take away from those sessions? Possibly not. So again, another chance for us to kind of reinvigorate that. And Safe actually, you know, if we're used to working with features and weighted shortest job first, Safe actually recommend that you use this for these improvement items. I'm probably going to get a black mark against my name from Safe soon. I don't recommend we go that far. I think, you know, if we think back to the Agile Manifesto, simplicity, the art of maximizing the amount of work not done, it should be completely apparent to all of us where the areas of focus would be. So I certainly wouldn't say we were going to sit down, do a big weighted shortest job first for the stakeholders. I don't think that would add any value. It might add value maybe if you were finding it difficult to get touch points with your stakeholders. But again, I think if you were in that kind of situation, it might be even more difficult to get them to come and refine an improvement backlog with you. And then really it's up to the teams again, generally, to go and do the work and exhibit that lean agile leadership. And I think that's more or less us. Is there one more slide, William? Is that right? No, that's us. So we're just to the question point. So if anybody has any other questions, we've still got a few minutes.
Thank you, Dave, for the interesting session on metrics. Yeah, you've made it very cool and something that I can relate to, and I hope a few people can relate to as well. So in doing this, is it more the role of the RTE or the Lean Agile Center of Excellence, or anyone within the team could pick it up and run this session? Could anyone do it? Or
I think anybody could do it. I mean, you know, certainly, I think probably the first time, if you've got an SPC in your lace, use them. They'll probably have done it before. But, you know, certainly, as with all these things, these are massive, massive opportunities for knowledge transfer and upskill. So, you know, I probably wouldn't think 3-4 of these down the line, that would have to be anyone in that space, either the RTE if they've got time, you know, preferably if you've got some, you know, kind of senior scrum masters in your team who might want to do more stuff at the train level, great way to introduce them to a lot of the stuff that's happening there outside of your scrum and scrums and so forth.
I have a question. So I think my initial question is, how widespread are the tools used that are not the Excel ones? Are you aware of that within industry?
No, I'm not in terms of absolute take up. I mean, like I say, at the moment, it looks as if at least 100 companies have used Agility Health so far in aerospace and defence. So actually, that would seem a fair level of penetration after 6 months. I would imagine in some of the biggies, like we mentioned, like Telco and FS, those numbers will be significantly bigger worldwide. I think the other interesting kind of quantum we have to consider here as well is we don't have to use the SAFE assessments at all. You know, we could still use something like Agile fluency modeling should we want to actually ask our own questions. You know, I've nothing against Agile fluency modeling, lots and lots of good things to say for it. I think the issue is unless you've got months and months and months to really prepare to go down that route and find out what the right questions are to answer, it's really, really difficult. At least this gives you a good starting point to say, well, actually, SAFE's telling me X, Y, and Z are important. I'll just go and measure those for now.
How often would you do these assessments?
Now, this is where I am going to deviate from what SAFE are going to say on the website. I'm sure I would do these no more than twice a year. They're long exercises, and what you never want to do is kind of get them into survey fatigue. I mean, you know, these people are potentially sitting down every week doing a retro. If you're going to turn up with another set of questions, can be very challenging. Yeah, so twice a year tops, I think.
And how long would you think it will take to go through the whole process?
So again, I think this is always a trade-off. We know time boxes are super important. Generally, I like to, especially the first time I run exercise, let them almost take as long as they're going to take. So in this example, I think I was spending between half an hour and an hour on each one of those core competencies spread over a few weeks. Probably in a more mature team, I wouldn't probably say it would require as much. I think maybe you could get through the whole thing in 2 hours. But remember, there is no real, in my opinion, benefit so much in terms of the scores you're being given. They're interesting from a benchmark perspective and other things. The real nuggets that this is going to give you as a coach or an RTE or member of the LACE or just somebody at all interested in this is those discussions. You know, why do we do what we do? Why is QA important? What are we really struggling with? That's really what's going to kind of flavor those takeaway items that you get out of this. So always remember, it's the conversation that's important. But we don't always want to give people so much time and space that they're completely on a soapbox. Any other questions?
Question
There's one in the
chat. It says, Dave, what's your take on volume metrics versus value in SAFE?
So when we talk about volume metrics, are we talking about capacity, velocity, all that kind of stuff?
It says SAFE seems to focus more on volume as opposed to value.
Yeah, I kind of, if I'm understanding the question, yeah, I think SAFE does come very, very metric heavy in all honesty. And I think there's a lot of this stuff you can almost dismiss, especially early on. I'm not saying stuff like, you know, your team's velocities, everything else doesn't tell you something, and it should definitely be screaming out and telling your Scrum Masters some things. But I think I actually prefer to use, you know, the program predictability measure. I don't think is bad. It's a wee bit subjective in terms, you know, here's how valuable we thought something would be, and here's how valuable we actually think it was. I think the only thing in that instance that SAFE doesn't take into account, if you're prototyping or building MVPs, you might technically be building something that was of no use at all as it was, but has actually helped you refine a process or a component for future build, in which case it's incredibly valuable. But how can you get everybody to agree that?
Any other additional questions? Okay, Dave, I know we've not talked about the coaching element. We've been running some coaching sessions as well. Does the business agility metrics measure the level of coaching that the teams do get?
Not directly. So I think we could probably see a clear bleed over in terms of the Lean Agile leadership questions. You would expect
Yeah.
would be exhibiting all those kind of things. It doesn't really give enough to say, are people getting what they want from coaching? So actually, William, what I do with all of the companies I work with is I'll actually come up with a separate, very, very lightweight survey monkey, again, about once a year. What's coaching delivering for you? What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? What do you want to never ever do ever again? And really, I think that kind of helps. I think sometimes we'll all be aware kind of coaching sessions can turn into therapy sessions for both parties. So that helps keep a little bit more discipline around them.
Shelley, have you got a question to ask on the area of coaching?
You're asking me to step up to the challenge, William. It's like bait to fish, right? Well, I'm a professional coach, so I like the discipline, and coaching's coaching, and something else is something else. So no therapy, please. I would say. So I'd rather coach for 10 minutes and get people to think out loud and learn something for themselves, rather than spending an hour of chatting or therapy. So yeah, I'm a bit of a disciplinarian, sorry. So the question, I suppose, is, what difference does the culture make, Agile coaching culture? Is there such a thing? And what do these tools actually say about culture? Because culture seems to be getting becoming a bit of a dirty word alongside diversity now. So we don't really want one culture in a sense, but every team has a culture, and it's always very unique, like humans are unique. So yeah, I've not used these tools, so I'll be really interested in know how they measure culture, or however they term it, however they name it, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't so much focus on any real, there's no section in itself on culture, but I think, if you look at the type of questions they can ask, you could certainly get a read across. I agree with what you're saying, Shirley. I think culture is becoming a dirty word, and I think that's because businesses have learned the most important thing about it. It's very incredibly different to change.
Yeah.
In some cases, it won't change. Actually, in some cases, it's fine for it not to change. But I think when we think about how a lot of these kind of transformational activities are sold and why they're attractive to seniors and businesses, it's almost like, look at all the debate about the Spotify model over the last kind of 18 months. There is a reason that, cool 20-year-old somethings have a certain culture over in Stockholm that is probably going to be difficult for us to apply in a, industrial park in Stoke-on-Trent. That's not to say anything against industrial parks in Stoke-on-Trent, by the way, but completely different types of people and culture. So I think that this would certainly let you signpost perhaps anything where, especially at the leadership level, you might need some help to unlock what might allow for that cultural change. But I think SAFE has also become a little bit sidestepping, what was the old phrase they used to use? Culture change comes last, not first. Okay, great. Tell me something I don't know.
Okay, it's a shame, but because people need to understand that they can influence culture. I think that seems to be what's missing. So I have a bit of a reaction to leadership, which I recognise we need it, but we also need people to step up. So.
Yeah.
Talking to them about how they can influence the culture of their team and how innovative it is, and how collaborative it is all down to the individuals to help it make it so. So, yeah, to kind of instill that power in everybody is a shame if we don't do that.
No, I agree, and there's a lot more to this than the old idea of. Now we've got a pool table and some soft play bags in the office. Now we've got a great culture.
Yeah, exactly. So So William, I think William and I are on the same page. We kind of think it's all about relationships at the end of the day. So yeah, as long as everyone is building relationships, everything's fine.
Good.
Building good relationships anyway, building working collaborative relationships, everything's fine.
Any more questions? We've got Barbara. Oh, okay.
Sorry, nothing from me, William. Sorry, I did raise my hand by mistake. Sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Though I must say that I totally agree with Dr. Shelley there. Relationship is key. And it's only the relationships that we build, the meaningful strategic relationships that we build, that enables us to achieve output. So totally agree with you.
I think, yeah. Thank you. We've gone past our time, but has added a very strong, apt comment. If leaders are trained to be leaders and lead an organization through change, these leaders leave. How sustainable is the SAFE framework then, as it seems to rely more on leaders making changes, and the real people who do the work is headless? Over to you, David.
Thanks for leaving me the easy question. Let's be honest. Yeah, powerful transformation personalities. Actually, I know this is going to sound incredibly old-fashioned, and I'll probably get a rap over the knuckles from a lot of people saying it. I think there is an element to some degree that some leaders are born and not trained. Some people, they've got it, and there's no real amount of management school or textbooks you can give to do that. I don't know what, they're incredibly rare. I've maybe worked with 3 of them in my entire career. But yeah, I think anytime you build out some way of change, I mean, we've probably seen this, we mentioned the whole idea of LSS earlier. How many improvement initiatives are businesses going to have to go to? Because like we say, so the person who was driving it leaves, all of a sudden it kind of goes to the side, or best case scenario gets renamed, so on and so forth. I think SAFE has slightly more longevity than that, because it's not always completely reliant on the people who set it up to stay around. So, generally your coaches are going to spin off any time in the first kind of 12 to 18 months. They might be replaced with other coaches, but I think most of us would support that that's absolutely what should happen. We're talking agile transformations about the cucumber in the pickle jar. By the end of the time, everybody has become the same again, and you probably always want that slightly outsider dissenting voice into your teams. In my experience, most people actually at team level really enjoy working in SAFE. They feel it gives them enough flow up and visibility to what's happening higher up in the organization, but still enough kind of customization. As Shirley said, this is all about people and relationships. If you can show those people a different way of working that they recognize as better than what they were doing before, they will stick through this through thick and thin and really, really do the hard yards in terms of the work. I think it's incredible. So I think, once you have the buy-in, well, think about any organization. I think if you've got more than 100 people who truly believe in something, it's incredibly difficult to unpick that. And I think that's almost on purpose.
Okay, thank you so much, David. And Dave, would you want to type in your email address so that if anyone wants to contact you for further questions, they can definitely get in touch? It's been such an engaging and full of insight session, and I want to thank everyone who joined us and added to the conversation, especially to you, Dave. I know I've been hunting and chasing you throughout the year, but we've made it, which is beautiful. Yeah. So on Thursday, we've got Dr. Shelley Thompson, and we are continuing on the coaching journey. I'll be sharing the Live Less around, and I'll be sharing it as well on LinkedIn. Join us on Thursday for a coaching session with Dr. Shelley Thompson. Building those relationships are so important, and she shares a lot on all of those. And For next week, we've got testing, and at the end of this month, we'll be stopping our usual weekly series. But thank you all for joining this session. And again, David, it's been such a pleasure hosting you. Have a wonderful day, everyone, and see you all soon.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.